Liv, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. It's about 9:30 in the evening over here, so I'm about to go to bed.
And I'm about to have lunch.
I won't keep you too long then. Basically, we're here to discuss in situ preservation, what it is, why are archaeologists so interested in it, and how we can potentially preserve archaeological sites and artefacts better. Anyway, just for people's info, could you explain what in situ preservation is?
Of course. In situ preservation is basically when you leave a site alone. It can be by putting concrete or asphalt over it if it's a flat site. Like in Sweden, could be a Stone Age settlement or some other kind of settlement that hasn't leave visual cues in the landscape. This is opposed to excavation, where you go down and remove the site and record the process of it. It's often used, well, when a site isn't necessarily viewed to be, well, in such high danger, so you need to remove it, or when you find it more effective to leave it alone.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, this is happening a lot more in archaeology, primarily because archaeologists, as their bread and butter work these days, are dealing with heritage management, not necessarily just archaeology. Those two are two sides of the same coin, but they are certainly not the same thing. So
absolutely. I mean, in Sweden we have the law dictates that we're going to preserve as much as we can. And preserve doesn't necessarily mean to excavate or to archaeologically research something. It can also mean to just leave it alone to further generations to research when they come along. So there's always this kind of balance between, should we excavate, should we leave it alone, can we leave it alone without doing damage to the site? And then if that can be done, then it will probably be just left alone in situ.
Yeah, and I mean, we did talk a little bit last night about this to try and get, I suppose, nut out some ideas around how we feel about this. And one of the issues that came up is that in situ preservation can be sometimes an easy excuse to save money.
Of course, it's much, well, most of the time anyway, a lot more cheap than to excavate. I mean, an excavation can go up in the millions when it comes to costs. In situ, it could be free if you're very lucky, or anyway, it is probably going to be cheaper.
Yeah, and I mean, it differs once again with maritime archaeology versus terrestrial archaeology. In situ preservation in maritime archaeology is a given a lot of the time, because when you're taking up organic artefacts off the seabed, a lot of the time they need to remain in those saline conditions for a very long time, which usually means if you are going to eventually put something like that in a museum such as the British Mary Rose, what you're going to find is you're going to need at least 20 years and millions of dollars of cost to actually contain that process. But I mean, one thing we discussed yesterday is this in situ preservation doesn't necessarily mean the site remains untouched. It can mean that instead of, for example, digging a basement floor to a new building, that they rather put a car park on the current level so the site isn't touched. And I think one of the things that we really discussed yesterday is there's not much evidence to show that this isn't actually damaging the site.
Exactly. I mean, I haven't at least seen any research. That's not to be said that it hasn't been done. But when it comes to like putting concrete or asphalting slots to make car parks instead of for example, a basement, I mean, I would imagine that we could have problems with the rerouting of water and minerals and heat changing over the site, which could change the conditions where the potential artifacts or features are damaged or changed.
Certainly, I mean, this really does have an environmental aspect about it. We're talking about the environment of the site, like the archaeological site is in fact an organism that if you change its niche, you can very much change what we find of the site maybe later on in the future when it does become threatened. And I mean, and I mean, this is the part and parcel of it, is that for the most part, archaeology in heritage management, sites will not be excavated unless they are directly threatened by development. And I think a lot of people who watch Archaeo-Chat may not actually know that the predominancy of archaeology that is done today is dictated by development, and it is really quite sad with time constraints and things like that we are forced nearly to leave things in situ rather than
You told me about this dig you were at with the cisterns.
Yeah. Little Lonsdale, we were very pressed for time in the end, and we found 2 cesspits, and we got down through the first maybe 50 centimetres of them, and I assume there was another 1.5 metres to go. We were pulling out 18th and 19th century ceramics and other artefacts, and just because we ran out of time, we weren't able to excavate the rest of them. And it's unfortunate, but that's the time constraints. That is the problem with, I suppose, archaeology in heritage management.
So-called rescue archaeology.
Rescue archaeology. I mean, that wherever you go in the world, there are 2 forms of archaeology in heritage management. There's assessment, and then there's rescue archaeology.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, you always have to, I mean, in Sweden, I think, the vast majority of archaeology is contract archaeology / rescue archaeology. They're kind of the same here, since we can't dig if we don't need to rescue anything.
That's it. And I mean, even UNESCO has, I suppose, legislation dictating to this that in situ preservation is the preferred method. And as much as I understand and respect that, I mean, there are many smart people at UNESCO, a lot smarter than myself, who will vie for this option. But sometimes I wonder if in situ preservation doesn't do more damage in some cases when it comes to, for example, public archaeology and display, where sometimes the only way to protect archaeology and gain funds for archaeology is by, in fact, promoting these sites. And you can't really promote a site that, No,
it's hard to gain public engagement from a parking lot. It's, I mean, and there is, I mean, I would suggest that it's important to have visual cues of heritage within the community to raise the public's engagement in it and to find it interesting. And that could be hard to do with, like, just a plain field or parking lot. Or you need these visual cues, and you need to research the local history to make it seem engaging and relevant for those who are essentially going to pay for it.
Exactly. I mean, it's. I was actually talking to a curator the other day about this situation when it comes to display and interpretation of archaeology. And this directly relates to in situ, obviously, because you can't do those things if everything's left in situ, where he tries to turn the 1,000 words of an archaeologist, the academic words of an archaeologist, into 100 words for every person to understand. And that's been the predominancy of his job for a long time. And but he doesn't actually say that that's a bad thing. You know, I mean, it gives him an income, but it's a sad thing to see that archaeologists are having trouble extending their interpretations out to the public in such a way.
I know. I spent some time when I was at the City Museum in Gothenburg doing the same thing, writing signs for a heritage path around the Iron Age and, well, very heritage-rich area in the city. And it's a challenge sometimes to try and put it in a way that is still correct but understandable for the public and interesting.
Absolutely. I mean, can you think of any way that we can actually move forward with this debate of in situ preservation?
I think, I mean, I understand the reasons for in situ preservation, and I understand that it's probably how it's going to continue to be due to how policies and the general opinion within the community is going. But I think if we're going to do that, we also need to be better at, well, publicly showing off our heritage in other ways if we can't do it with the sites themselves. And how that's going to be done, that has to, well, that depends on the site really and what the story is for that local area. But we need to reach out, and we need to try and do some research on the long-term effects of putting concrete or asphalt over these sites, so we're sure that we're actually not damaging them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. And people are probably sick of me saying, oh, we agree with each other, but I really find it difficult sometimes to actually fault another archaeologist in this sense, because it seems as if we all actually agree on these issues a lot of the time, about things like in situ preservation, about international law and what should be reflected and who should be in control of heritage, all these issues. It's quite difficult. But all in all, I really, really hope that you guys back at Archaeo Soup have potentially can take something away from this discussion. I'm going to let Liv go and eat her lunch, and I'm going to get off to bed. So we'll catch you all another time. See ya, Liv.
See ya. Bye.